Starbucks didn't become the world's biggest coffee chain because it made the best coffee. It became the world's biggest coffee chain because it made people want to stay. For decades, Starbucks wasn't just a place to grab a drink. It was where people met friends, studied for exams, worked on business ideas, or simply escaped the noise of everyday life. It turned a simple cup of coffee into an experience, and in doing so, built one of the most valuable brands on earth. But somewhere along the way, that experience began to disappear. The comfortable chairs gave way to pick-up shelves. Conversations were replaced by mobile notifications. Customers stopped lingering and started grabbing their drinks before rushing out the door. Then came rising competition, employee unrest, global boycotts, slowing sales. And for the first time in decades, Starbucks found itself asking a question it had never faced before. How do you bring back the magic that made people fall in love with your brand? This is the story of how Starbucks built a coffee empire, and how, in the pursuit of becoming bigger, it nearly lost what made it special. I'm Ahmed, and this is the Money Archives, where every fortune tells a story. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories about the rise, fall, and evolution of the world's biggest companies, consider subscribing and let me know in the comments, which business should we uncover next? For most of the 20th century, coffee in America wasn't something people thought much about. It was cheap, convenient, and predictable. You poured it from a diner pot, grabbed a cup at a gas station, or brewed it at home before rushing out the door. Coffee was fuel, it wasn't an experience. That began to change in 1983. Howard Schultz, then the marketing director of Starbucks, traveled to Milan, Italy. What he found there wasn't just better coffee, it was an entirely different culture. Espresso bars were woven into everyday life. People weren't stopping in for a caffeine fix and leaving. They stood at the counter talking with baristas, met friends before work, read the morning paper, and treated the cafe as a place to slow down, even if only for a few minutes. Schultz returned to Seattle convinced that America wasn't missing better coffee, it was missing a place to enjoy it. At the time, Starbucks was a small company that sold high-quality coffee beans and equipment. It wasn't serving espresso drinks, and it certainly wasn't the neighborhood cafe people know today. The founders weren't interested in changing that vision, so Schultz eventually left to start his own coffee company, Il Giornale. A few years later, with the help of investors, he purchased Starbucks and merged the two businesses. That decision would transform not only the company, but coffee culture across America. Schultz built Starbucks around a simple idea he called the third place. Home was the first place, work was the second. Starbucks would become the third. It would be somewhere people actually wanted to spend time, a comfortable space between the demands of work and home. Soft music played in the background, comfortable chairs invited customers to stay. The smell of freshly ground coffee filled the store. Baristas learned regular customers' names. Even ordering a drink felt different, with words like latte, cappuccino, and macchiato becoming part of everyday vocabulary. People weren't just paying for coffee, they were paying for how Starbucks made them feel. That strategy changed everything. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Starbucks expanded at an astonishing pace. New stores opened across the United States and then around the world. Premium coffee, once considered a luxury, became part of millions of people's daily routines. Drinks like the Frappuccino became cultural icons. Seasonal releases like the pumpkin spice latte created annual excitement, and Starbucks turned a product that cost pennies to make into one of the most profitable businesses in retail. By the early 2000s, Starbucks had become far more than a coffee chain. It had become one of the most recognizable brands on the planet. But success created a challenge that every great company eventually faces. When you've already changed an industry, how do you keep growing without changing yourself? For years, Starbucks had perfected something that few companies ever achieve. It wasn't just selling a product, it was selling a feeling. People didn't mind paying $4 or $5 for a cup of coffee because they believed they were getting more than coffee. They were buying a place to relax, to meet friends, to study, or to work. That third place philosophy had become the foundation of Starbucks' success. But by the 2000s, the company faced a problem of its own making. It had already conquered the market. There were Starbucks locations on busy city corners, inside airports, college campuses, shopping malls, grocery stores, hospitals, and even inside other retailers. Finding new customers became increasingly difficult, so the focus shifted from opening new markets to serving more people more quickly. The answer was technology. Starbucks became one of the first major restaurant chains to fully embrace mobile ordering and digital rewards. Customers could order ahead with a few taps on their phone, skip the line, and collect their drink within minutes. The loyalty program exploded in popularity, encouraging customers to visit more often while giving Starbucks valuable data about their buying habits. From a business perspective, it was brilliant. The app became one of the most successful restaurant loyalty platforms in the world, generating billions of dollars in repeat business and making Starbucks even more efficient. But efficiency came with a cost. Stores that were once designed for conversation and comfort gradually became fulfillment centers for mobile orders. Pickup shelves overflowed with drinks waiting to be collected. Baristas spent more time preparing online orders than talking with customers standing at the counter. Seating areas became less important, while speed became the priority. The cafe that encouraged people to slow down was now encouraging them to move as quickly as possible. Even Howard Schultz, the man who built Starbucks around the idea of the third place, had warned years earlier about the dangers of growing too fast. In 2007, as Starbucks raced to open thousands of new stores, he admitted the company had made decisions that commoditized the Starbucks experience. Automatic espresso machines blocked the connection between baristas and customers. Stores began to feel standardized rather than unique. In the pursuit of efficiency, Starbucks had started losing some of the personality that made it special. For a while, none of it seemed to matter. Revenue continued to grow. The company kept expanding. Investors were happy. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Customers weren't necessarily leaving because the coffee had become worse. They were leaving because Starbucks no longer felt different. The company had spent decades convincing people they were paying for more than coffee. Now, many customers were beginning to wonder if they were simply paying more for the same experience they could find somewhere else. And just as those questions began to grow louder, Starbucks was about to face challenges it couldn't solve with a faster app or a new rewards program. By the early 2020s, the cracks were becoming harder to ignore. For years, Starbucks had been the company everyone else was trying to catch. Now, for the first time in decades, it was the one looking over its shoulder. Independent coffee shops had become more popular, attracting customers who wanted handcrafted drinks, locally roasted beans, and a more personal cafe experience. At the same time, fast-growing chains like Dutch Brouwers built loyal followings with faster service and a youthful, energetic brand, while McDonald's and Dunkin' continued improving their coffee at lower prices. Consumers suddenly had more choices than ever before, and many of those choices were cheaper, faster, or felt more authentic. Inside Starbucks, the pressure was building as well. Employees across hundreds of stores began voting to unionize, arguing that staffing levels hadn't kept pace with growing demand, particularly as mobile orders continued to increase. Workers described stores that were busier than ever, while customers complained about longer waits, inconsistent service, and cafes that no longer felt welcoming. The labor movement generated months of headlines, creating one of the most significant public relations challenges in Starbucks' history. Instead of being known for premium coffee and customer experience, the company increasingly found itself defending its workplace culture. Then, in late 2023, Starbucks was pulled into an entirely different controversy. As the humanitarian crisis and military operations in Gaza dominated global headlines, boycott campaigns targeting companies perceived to have ties to Israel spread rapidly across social media. Starbucks became one of the most recognizable brands caught in that movement. The controversy began after Starbucks Workers United published a message expressing solidarity with Palestinians. Starbucks responded by filing a trademark lawsuit against the union, saying the message could wrongly suggest it represented the company's official position. The company repeatedly stated that it did not fund or support any government or military and was not taking a political position. But by then, public perception had already shifted. Across parts of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and other international markets, boycott campaigns gained momentum. In some regions, stores reported noticeably lower customer traffic, and company executives later acknowledged that the controversy had weighed on international sales. It was another reminder that, in today's world, a global brand can become part of a global conversation almost overnight, whether it wants to or not. Then came another setback. Inflation pushed menu prices higher as Starbucks passed rising costs on to consumers. A coffee that once felt like an affordable daily treat was becoming a luxury purchase for many households. Customers who had once visited every morning began cutting back, while others started looking for less expensive alternatives. Each challenge on its own was manageable: growing competition, labor disputes, higher prices, global boycotts. But together, they created something Starbucks hadn't experienced in years. Momentum was slipping. For decades, Starbucks had seemed almost unstoppable. Now, the company wasn't just fighting to grow, it was fighting to remind people why it mattered in the first place. That challenge would require more than a new drink or another loyalty promotion. It would require Starbucks to rethink what kind of company it wanted to be. For most of Starbucks' history, being the biggest name in coffee was enough. Today, it isn't. When Howard Schultz introduced the cafe concept to America, Starbucks had very few competitors offering premium coffee. Now, almost every city has dozens of independent coffee shops, regional chains, and specialty cafes, giving consumers more choice than ever before. That shift has created opportunities for a new generation of businesses. One of them is Qahwah House. Founded in Dearborn, Michigan, the company has built a loyal following by introducing customers to Yemeni coffee traditions, using beans imported directly from Yemen. Instead of relying on speed and convenience, its cafes focus on handcrafted drinks and a welcoming atmosphere that encourages customers to stay rather than rush out the door. Another growing brand is Shir Chai Co. Rather than competing head-to-head with Starbucks' espresso menu, the company has carved out its own niche with traditional South Asian chai, specialty teas, and cafe spaces that celebrate culture as much as the drinks themselves. By focusing on authenticity instead of scale, businesses like Shir Chai Co. have attracted customers looking for something different from the familiar chain experience. They're far from the only ones. Across the country, thousands of independent cafes have found success by offering locally roasted beans, seasonal menus, unique interiors, and stronger connections with their communities. At the same time, regional chains like Dutch Brothers continue expanding aggressively, while established competitors such as Dunkin' and McDonald's have improved their coffee offerings at lower prices. The result is a coffee market unlike anything Starbucks faced 20 years ago. Customers aren't choosing between Starbucks and a cup of gas station coffee anymore. They're choosing between Starbucks and dozens of quality alternatives, each offering its own style, story, and identity. Recognizing that reality, Starbucks has started changing course. New CEO Brian Niccol has made it clear that the company wants to simplify its operations, improve customer service, and make its cafes feel welcoming again. The goal isn't just to increase sales, it's to remind customers why Starbucks became an icon in the first place. Whether those changes will be enough remains to be seen. Because winning customers was one challenge, winning them back may prove even harder. When Howard Schultz looked at the coffee bars of Italy more than 40 years ago, he wasn't inspired by the coffee itself. He was inspired by the people, the conversations, the sense of community, the idea that a coffee shop could become part of someone's daily life. That vision transformed Starbucks from a single store in Seattle into one of the most recognizable brands in the world. But success has a way of changing even the greatest companies. As Starbucks expanded across continents, embraced technology, and chased faster growth, it also became larger, more efficient, and more profitable. Yet somewhere along the way, many customers began to feel that something had been left behind. Today, Starbucks isn't just competing with Dunkin', Dutch Brothers, or thousands of independent cafes. It's competing with the expectations it created. The company taught millions of people that coffee could be an experience worth paying for. Now, a new generation of cafes is offering that same promise in its own way, forcing Starbucks to answer a difficult question. Can a global corporation with nearly 40,000 stores still deliver the feeling that made people fall in love with a single neighborhood coffee shop? The answer will shape the next chapter of Starbucks. Because this story was never really about coffee. It was about how a company built an empire by understanding what people wanted, and how easily that connection can fade when growth becomes the priority. Maybe Starbucks will find its way back, maybe it won't. But one thing is certain, the company that changed the way the world drinks coffee is now fighting to prove that it still belongs at the center of coffee culture. I'm Ahmed, and this is the Money Archives. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the rise, fall, and evolution of the world's biggest companies. And let me know in the comments, which business should we uncover next?